I do.
Okay, welcome to Red Lipstick Talk. I'm excited for another Red Lipstick Talk Friday night edition.
We have nothing else to
Ooh,
do we?
no,
No, we don't.
quarantine, girl.
But be here and
Quarantine.
watch Red Lipstick Talk.
I only dress up for this show.
I know, right? Put on our red lips. Like you were trying to do you have red lipstick on?
No, I have my more natural pink lipstick. Sorry.
Okay,
I messaged you to
it's
wear red
in the
lipstick.
shade.
But it's all right. It's all right.
Sorry.
That was good. So, welcome to Red Lipstick Talk. I see people are coming on now. So, welcome to our Friday edition on YouTube and Facebook.
Yay! Good to see you, Renee. Welcome, folks. I'm here again with Renee, special edition Red Lipstick Talk, and today we have a special guest, Kiratiana. Welcome, Kiratiana.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
We're excited to have you here. So let me just say, Kiratiana is known as the Queen of Rio de Janeiro.
I used to be the queen of Rio de Janeiro. Ain't nobody there to be the queen of now.
And what did I used to be, Nefertiti of Salvador?
You know, you were gone. You've been gone so long.
Whatever. I was the mayor of Salvador. So everybody would be like, Renee's the mayor of Salvador, knows everyone. So anyway, but
no, Renee was like the Kevin Bacon of Salvador because everyone was connected to Renee by at least 3 degrees.
Yeah. And that was Kiratiana in Rio.
Really?
So it's exciting to have
I'll take that as a compliment.
here. Yes. You are still the queen of Rio. Okay. So introduce yourself. Who are you? Who is this Kiratiana that we have on Red Lipstick Talk today?
So I have been living in Rio de Janeiro for the last 5 years, working as a international correspondent, as a freelance journalist. And that means that I report on Brazil and report on Rio de Janeiro and send my reporting to publications in the US and sometimes even in the UK. And I actually arrived right before, in 2015, about a year and a half before the Olympic and Paralympic Games. I even had the opportunity to work for the Olympic and Paralympic Games, managing their social media. And I decided to stay on because I just couldn't get enough of Brazil. And actually, I have a very deep interest in all things related to Afro-Brazilian people, culture, news, events, carnival. And so I was just like, well, let me just keep living in Brazil. And so 5 years later, I'm technically still there. I still have an apartment there.
Yes. So let's say hello to those that's coming on really quick. Hello, Kimberly. Welcome. Hey. Hello, James. And hello, Sid. Boa noite. Hello. Welcome. So so was that your first time coming to Brazil in 2015?
No, actually,
or had you been here before?
No. I have a very extensive relationship with Brazil. My first time in Brazil was actually in 2003, January 2003. I was traveling around the world with a fellowship that I gotten from Harvard University. And this fellowship literally just gave me money to travel. So I decided to kind of trace the African diaspora. I went to West Africa in the fall of 2002. And then the next place I went to was Brazil, because Brazil, at that time, everybody said Brazil has the most number of Black people outside of Africa. And it still does have the most number of Black people outside of Africa. But that was kind of like its claim to fame then. So I figured I would go check it out. And I arrived in Brazil, I think, oh my gosh, January 5th of 2003. Started in Rio de Janeiro, stayed there for just 2.5 weeks. Then I went to Minas Gerais because Minas Gerais had a very extensive gold mining that you used that in which enslaved Black people participated in. So I went to go check that out. Then I, heard so much about Salvador and how it's like, this is like Africa and Brazil. And when I got to Salvador, I was like, yes, this is Africa and Brazil. And you know how Salvador is. You get stuck there. You're like, I'm just standing. I'm just going to be here for 1 week. And then you look down, you're like, I've been here for like 3 months. What's going on? So I did carnival in Salvador. I just, hung around Pelourinho for like 2.5 months. And then I eventually continued my travels and visited Recife, Pernambuco, as well as São Luís, Maranhão. So that's when I really got to know as a tourist Afro-Brazil. And I came back in 2005, came back as a journalist in 2014, and I decided that I was going to move to Brazil in 2015 and work as a journalist there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, because I felt like when you said 2015, I felt like I had met you before 2015.
No, actually,
we had met
so because I think we were just on the same travel groups.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we met in person until 2000. No, we met in 2015 in Salvador.
Okay, because I knew we met the first time in Salvador, but it felt like it was sooner than that. Yeah. So
maybe it was in some other country, Renee. So thank you, Kiratiana, for sharing your trajectory. I think it's important to hear that and understand sort of where you've been, where your footprints have sort of stepped. And I think it's good for all of us to share. So Renee, I know you have a special way that you got to Salvador, if you want to share that with folks, and then I can share a little bit too. And then we can start kind of sharing how we found friends.
I definitely think that's important to share so people can kind of hear how we got here. So that's just great. So again, hello Marie, and hello Paulo. Brazil is the second largest Black population after Africa for sure, but people have no self-esteem because informations are denied to them and the media only shows white people. Okay, so we can talk about that later. We'll do the introductions and then kind of hit on Paulo. Thank you for expressing that, Paulo. So for me, honestly, my whole thing was I was going to live in Argentina because I wanted to study Spanish. So living in the US as a psychotherapist, I had a lot of Spanish clients coming in. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna, do a year sabbatical, starting in India, then the rest of the time in Argentina. And so then I had a friend of mine who was like, Renee, why are you going to Argentina? Ain't no Black people there. You need to go to Brazil. I was like, because I want to learn Spanish. And I love the wine and the pizza. So I was like, Argentina. And she's like, no, you got to go to Brazil. And so in 2011, I went to Brazil. I was in Argentina since I was already there. I got to Brazil in Salvador for Carnival. And I had never even heard of Salvador. Like, I was like, all I heard of was Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo. I was like, why is she not going to Rio? Like, that's where everything is. That's where it's fun. And so, so I met her in Salvador. It was supposed to be 2 weeks. She left. I stayed. I literally stayed for another year and a half before even leaving Salvador to go back to the States to visit, or Rio, or any place. And Salvador just really has a beautiful culture. It has a beautiful history. And I really felt like I could connect to my roots, because growing up in the US, my family's from Haiti, but that spiritual connection was lost because in the US, there's just a lot of negative talks about the spirituality, a lot of negative talk about, connecting to the earth, voodoo ceremonies. I would hear all of these things. And coming here to Brazil, to Salvador specifically, I was able to, oh my God, enjoy the food, the moqueca, acarajé, learning about capoeira, going to capoeira rodas, going to candomblé ceremonies. It just literally opened me up to a whole new world that I had never seen. And I was like, wow. And I just got to add one more piece. It was a healing piece. Salvador was just so magical. Synchronicities would happen. Like, you would just meet someone just out of the blue, and and it wasn't just a chance meeting. It was a reason you had to connect with them, to get something or to learn something or give something to them. And it was just crazy how that would happen. And it was just such I became more spiritual living here. Like, I feel like I was your average psychotherapist. You're crazy if you're hearing voices. You're crazy if you're doing that, And here, I connected to that spiritual side, and I was like, yeah, this is not crazy. There are, so it was really, really, really deep for me. And I just couldn't leave. So just like Kiratiana said, it sucks you in. You know, and so what was your experience getting here? And so really quick before you talk, I see people are coming on. So, you know, say hello. If you have any questions, feel free to ask so we can address it during the show. So go ahead. Yes, Nefertiti.
So yes, folks, that kind of thing about synchronicity. So I actually went to Salvador in 2013. It was January 2nd. I had decided to leave my job in the States. So I'm an organizer by training. I do a lot of movement work, and I had gotten pretty burned out by the demand and by, you know, kind of putting my artistic dreams aside. So I said, okay, I'm going to go to Salvador specifically. I'd been working with a choreographer here in the Bay Area. I'm back in the Bay Area, California, who is from Salvador, and he had mentioned a school that's a 2.5-year technical program. And for folks who don't know about Brazil, there's a lot of, well, there was, because now the current president is fucking shit up, but there was a lot of funding for culture and for arts. The government funds in big ways, both capacity building as well as, you know, the spread of different kinds of art forms. So for me, it was important to kind of go back to learning and engaging with my artistic process in a context that was not majority white. I was not trying to go to school here. And when I had heard about Salvador and what it is, and also being a popular school, so it's a school that's free and accessible to folks from all walks of life, to me, that was really important in building with those kinds of folks. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I don't know Portuguese. I don't know anybody. I had one friend that I knew who was living there at the time. And I went. And so I got there. And the second day I was there, I went to a restaurant and I saw a mutual friend of Renee and I's, Amara. Shout out to Amara. Wonderful artist, choreographer who was there as well. I said, hey, Amara, how are you doing? And she said, I'm great. This is my friend Renee. So I literally met Renee my second day there. And we've been friends, you know, 7 years later. So
wow, long time.
The synchronicity of things. And after that, you know, she invited me to a community healing space that she had opened up with a couple folks. And, you know, that first 3 years I spent time in the school. So really focusing on finishing school, building relationships with folks from the school. And I also, you know, after school, I thought I was going to go back to the States. I ended up staying because I built these relationships with other artists who were interested in continuing new projects, new ideas. And so after school, I stayed an additional 5 years. I'm going on my 8th year being in Salvador, and always engaging in different cultural projects, which, you know, I can talk about a little later in the show. But different cultural, you know, Afro-Brazilian music and dance is what I focus on. A lot of the groups are actually women-centered and women-led. So women sort of retaking up space culturally, artistically, is something that's really powerful that I'm, you know, dedicated to. And also the last few years has really gained a lot of momentum and visibility, especially
that's beautiful.
Queer women, queer folks is really taking up space culturally as well. I think historically it's been very male dominant, you know, who plays music and who dances is very, you know, gendered. And so we're really breaking that, flipping the script. And then I ended up opening up a cultural space 2 years ago.
Hold on one second. So before Salvador I wanted to like go back
on to me.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Let's go back. Hello, Mr. Style Jam, who says I'm eager to watch this one. Yes. So you know, it was interesting because you brought up Amara, and Amara is just an amazing person who always comes to Salvador. And so I met her through dance from Sebi. And you know, and as Nefertiti was saying, that's just like, it's just so amazing, like the synchronicity, you know. And it's like, you know, Amara and I, we don't even keep in touch that often, but we, you know, Nefertiti and I met, and now 8 years later, we have this red lipstick talk. And that's just kind of, you know, how important it, you know, these different things happen when you're in Brazil, you know, and the same thing, like, you know, when Kiratiana and I met, and we were supposed to be doing Afro-Punk Salvador this year, you know, so, but thanks to COVID, that's not happening. So there's just like, you know, I think that one of the things that for me, when I first got here, you know, I didn't know anyone. And my friend who came here with me for 2 weeks, you know, I was thinking about this as you were talking and you were saying, you know, you and I met 2 days on your second day here. And it was just interesting because when I got here and I hadn't known anyone, the friend who invited me here, she left, but I had met another friend through her, Sawani Bispo, and she's a Brazilian and just an amazing sister who's done a lot. She's traveled the world. She actually has a program to help Black Brazilians be able to travel. And so I was very fortunate to stay with her. She invited me when she heard I was like, I'm staying here, I can't leave. And she was like, oh, come stay with me. And her family invited me into their home, allowed me to stay in their home and didn't charge any rent. And I was just like, where would you see this in the US? Like, I don't think I know anyone that would ever do that. Like, they didn't know me. Parents never met me. Mom never met me. You know, her and I hung out 1 or 2 times, and that was at restaurants. And I had said, you know, I'm going to stay here. And they were like, come stay in my house. And that was one of the big things that was kind of like, wow. So, you know, we're talking about building community and friendships. My first year and a half, I didn't know any Americans. And I think that was one of the biggest things that helped me to be able to learn the language Portuguese, because I was with Brazilians and in living with a Brazilian family. And then from her, I met a guy that I started dating who was Brazilian, didn't speak any English, and I went and I lived with him. So it was like, I'm in it. So how was it for you, Kiratiana? Like, when you first got here, how was it for you to kind of like build that community, build or find friends? Like, what was it like? Did you find friends immediately? Were your friends foreigners? Were they Brazilian?
Well, I'd just like to say that my move to Brazil was definitely planned. I had done a reporting project in Brazil the summer of 2014 during the World Cup. And when I came back to the US in July, I made the decision to move to Brazil the next year after I finished graduate school to become an international correspondent. So from that June of 2014 until like March of 2015, I actually went on I basically tried to interview every single person who I knew who had lived in Brazil, or who had an expertise in Brazil, who knew people in Brazil. And so what happened was, this included journalists, people who were living there, people who focused on Afro-Brazilian studies. So what happened was, you know, by the time I actually got to Brazil, I had a very extensive network of people who I could call on or just assist me in whatever. And then one of the things that I did do when I first got to Brazil, instead of going straight to Rio, because I knew that I wanted to live in Rio, I actually went to Salvador to take about 5 weeks of Portuguese classes. And so when I went to taking Portuguese classes, it was actually pretty easy to tap into the expat community there. Just because, I mean, I don't know. I don't even know how I met these people. I don't know if I met them through Portuguese classes or just like, I just don't even remember so I just ended up meeting all these expats in Salvador. And also I knew people in Salvador from my previous visit. Like, for example, Paulo Rogério is like a Afro-Brazilian who does extensive work regarding entrepreneurship in Salvador. I connected with his center there. He had like a co-working center, so I was able to connect with some Afro-Brazilians there. And also, you also have to remember that since I'm a journalist, like part of my job is just meeting people, talking to people. So in doing that, I just kind of naturally always am meeting new people and adding people to my Rolodex, even though Rolodexes don't exist anymore. When I got to, I'm trying to figure out what I did when I got back. So I came back to Rio after 5 weeks in Salvador. I actually stayed at an Airbnb, and then I found an apartment just, through digital networking. And one of the first communities that I actually tapped into was, I was focused on my work as a journalist. So I reached out to journalist networks that were available in Rio de Janeiro. And there were international journalism networks, there were women's journalism networks. And it was through these people who helped me. They helped me find an apartment. They helped me get stories. I even, for the first 3 months when I was in Rio, I actually volunteered. Like, I didn't, like, the first 3 months of working as a journalist in Rio de Janeiro, I actually did not earn any money because I was volunteering as a volunteer journalist to at an organization called Rio on Watch, which is run by catalytic communities. And so I even, like, I did this video where that helped them raise $50,000. I did this, I was just doing work for free. And I think one of the pieces of advice that I could give people who are watching this, if indeed perhaps you have a source of income and you are moving to a destination without, quote unquote, a 9 to 5, one of the best ways to actually develop relationships with people is to volunteer. Just to, donate your time, donate your skills. My skills obviously were journalistic skills. So I donated my journalistic skills, and the people who I met through that organization and the knowledge that I gained through, working with people who knew Rio and who knew Brazil much more than I did, that benefited me for like the next 5 years. And, the strange thing is that eventually over the next 5 years, like, I don't think I really became the queen of Rio until probably like 2017 or maybe 2017, because 2015 and 2016, I was extremely just focused on work, focused on like establishing myself as a journalist. And so, if I met expats, I didn't necessarily seek out expats, but if I met them, I definitely added them to my phone. And I did do, like, I remember, I randomly created this Black woman in Brazil WhatsApp group, I think in 2016, that I would randomly add people to, but I actually wasn't even that active. Like, there were other people in the group who were more active than me. And so I think
that sounds like my Salvador expat group. I just added it. I'm not that active in it.
One of the things I would
throw this out there for people to connect.
Yeah. Also, another piece of advice is that if you want to connect with people, definitely be very proactive about it. Just seeking out, having coffee with people, or creating communities. Like, WhatsApp group is like the easiest way to create community. Though obviously having in-person groups actually solidifies those relationships. And so I did that more in 2017 than I had done in 2015 and 2016. In 2017, that's when I started organizing these like, hey, let's go to Sao Paulo and go to this amazing event, and people would actually show up, and the rest is history.
Let me ask you both a question. So what have you noticed, like, in terms of creating communities with Brazilians or Americans or foreigners? Like, for me, for example, when I first got to Salvador, I was connecting more with Brazilians and I was having communities just naturally not doing anything. Well, I'm not gonna say not naturally not doing anything, because I met Salwani, lived with her family, but then I started volunteering. So I had this time, and I wanted to be able to do something to give back. And so I volunteered as a psychotherapist in English, because I was kind of like English Portuguese. And so at the school, Bahia Street is what it's called in Salvador, in 2 de Julio, Bahia Street, I was volunteering there. And so from volunteering there, that's kind of how I got into community and started meeting people, and it was all Brazilians. And so, but I found that outside of actually volunteering someplace or working someplace, it's hard to find Brazilians like to really connect. And so then outside of those spaces, then I end up connecting more with foreigners. What have you found? Like, has it been easy to find community and have strong connections with Brazilians, or do you find yourself more with Americans? Or what is it like for both of you?
Just, I can share really briefly. I think there's a couple factors there. I think one factor is, you know, I like that you both, Kiratiana and Renée, talked about the importance of volunteering, and I think that's like one of the biggest tips if you're going to live abroad, is like thinking about how you can go to a space, like how can you be of service. And I think why that builds community is because it builds trust with whoever you're working with whoever you're, you know, whoever you're there, and you're like saying, you know, I'm here, I'm down, and I'm here to be of service. And I think building trust is how you build community, especially if you're not from the neighborhood, or, you know, you have trouble with the language. When your actions sort of show that you're willing to, you know, chegar junto, how they say in Portuguese, like arrive together, it builds some trust. So I think that the difficulty outside of that context, at least for me, so I was in school, and all of my classmates were Brazilian, and the biggest issue there had to do with geography. So I think when you're in a city or you arrive somewhere, and what is the politics of the geography and the transportation really impacts, you know, how much you connect with people live or virtually. So I have, you know, I would check in and talk with these folks, my classmates, all the time on WhatsApp. So WhatsApp is also a big tool. But in terms of meeting up after class, you know, or on the weekend to see a movie or see a play or, you know, whatever, it was difficult because of the fact that so many of them lived in the outskirts of the city, and transportation was an issue. And, you know, and then because of that, the neighborhoods themselves become much more central in terms of spaces for building community. So where I lived was another place where I had to build community, whatever neighborhood that was in, at least for me in Salvador. So those are the factors.
Yeah, for me, I actually would say that I built community with Brazilians and Americans. And I think what the reason for that was because when I first got to Brazil in 2015, you know, I was really into just discovering Blackness in Rio. And the strange thing is that many of the expats who I knew just weren't interested in going to samba schools, weren't interested in going to Roda de Sambas. You know, Rio attracts various types of expats, and there's a part of expats who just want to go to the beach and just, you know, enjoy the beach life. And that wasn't necessarily what I had come to Brazil to do. So because I was doing, and most of the stuff I have to say I was doing alone, just because alone, at least the first 6 months, just because I didn't really know too many people. And the thing that I will say about Brazilians is that to some extent, they are, at least in Rio, I've heard it's different around Brazil, but they can be kind of flaky.
Yes.
So, and like, you know, planning with Brazilians just can sometimes also be difficult. So what I ended up doing is that, you know, I started going to these same places or these same samba schools, and I would start seeing the same people. And so when they started seeing me, they were like, oh, she's the Black American who always comes to these Black events. And the strangest thing is that this is just something that I noticed about Rio in general, but, you know, the last 5 years, Brazil has the interest in just Blackness in Brazil in general by Black people in Brazil has increased dramatically. But I remember in 2015 and before the Olympics, where I would go to these events and it was like the same 20 Black people who I would see at every single Black event in Rio. So we all knew each other eventually. And then sometimes they would, you know, invite me to their birthday party. And also one of the things I noticed about Brazilians that I would say perhaps different than Americans, is that I do feel like to establish a very close relationship with Brazilians is that you have to almost force yourself upon them. when I say force yourself upon them, I mean that, you know, Brazilians established in general, warm Brazilians. I mean, there's obviously the diversity. There's 200 million people. I can't make a generalization about 200 million people, but I would say in general, Brazilians are very warm. And so I think sometimes as Americans, we might mistake their warmthness for, you know, as something that, oh my gosh, this person cares about me and is one of my best friends. No, they're just warm people.
They just like to touch. They like to kiss.
Yes.
They like to hug.
Yes.
So, you know, so I actually found that, you know, something like, there's certain things, like, for example, when a Brazilian invites you over to their house, go, they will say it because they say that to everybody, but they half expect you to go. And when you show up, they're like, oh, okay. She actually took me up on offer. And also I find that Brazilians, inviting yourself over to Brazilian people's houses. Now I would never do that to my mother. My mother hates people who invite themselves over to her house. But I do find that Brazilians are very open to, you know, foreigners and open to hosting foreigners when, you know, if they have the ability to. So I just felt like, whereas with my American friends, the establishing the kind of rapport was a bit more easier just because we knew each other's culture. We knew cultural things that connected us. With my Brazilian friends, I just put more effort into it. You know, I had to try to speak their language. My Portuguese, I speak Portuguese now, but obviously in 2015, 2016, maybe I wasn't speaking great Portuguese. And I had to just like really force myself upon them.
You know, that's an interesting point, because I think you do have to kind of force yourself on them, because I kind of noticed, like,
am I the only one who has an issue with that phrase, force myself upon Brazilians?
That is strong. That is strong. That is strong. I don't feel like I have to like really force myself, but the thing is, so like what you said, I agree, and they're very warm. But I think to really truly let you in on their circle, you have to build the trust. And so even though that they're warm, it doesn't mean that they necessarily trust and will open and allow you into their circle completely. So I think one of the things that Kiratiana was saying was constantly seeing you, you know, yeah, that kind of helps. And I think that because, like, you know, when I lived in Salvador, from, you know, doing the volunteer work and being with people, and then I studied when I went on to take my transpersonal psychology course, my postgraduate course, meeting Brazilians, and they're seeing me consistently in class and getting to know me, getting to feel me, then they would invite me to places. They would invite me into their homes, you know, and so I think that made a difference. So I definitely say, you know, going out and putting yourself out there and doing different things, like, you know, volunteering, go to school. Like I went to study transpersonal psychology. Also went to Ufibara dance, Fonsebi to dance, and just doing those dance classes, I met tons of people, foreigners and Brazilians, and that was one way to really get in and find community and start meeting people and connecting to people. You know?
Yes.
We have a question. So really quick, Mr. Style Jam says, yeah, I observed this in Salvador as well. Geographic differences and where we live create some barriers. Totally agree. My time in Salvador this past winter had me in awe when seeing the juxtaposition compared to my trip 5 years ago. Malka sends hearts, love. And then we have a question here. Oh, Mr. Staljam also says, great points, Kiratiana. I'm a New Yorker of a certain era and leery of some invitations of Brazil. In my mind, I always think of people getting set up. I know it's over the top, but hey. No, you know what? I definitely want to say, I understand that because I'm a New Yorker also. I'm from Brooklyn. And I think that's the Brooklyn mentality. You know, we don't necessarily trust, you know? And he's like, what's going on? So Marie has a question.
Oh, I'm just sorry. I just wanted to interrupt. So I totally understand you, Mr. Style Jam. Actually, because I came to Rio as a journalist, like I made sure to go to events where I felt safe and go to places where I felt safe. There's tons of places in Rio and probably any city in Brazil where there's just not safe for you to go alone. So I definitely limited myself to venturing out in places where I felt like they were safe.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think safety is a really important point when we're talking. And I think we're talking about safety. We're talking about trust as kind of like these components that make us feel like, okay, I can trust this person or folks in this community. So I think it's also thinking about like, how do we also think about our safety, but also maintain an openness and an availability to the possibilities of the relationships that are possible, right? So I think for sure, Kiratiana, I'm like I would do things by myself and go to places that I, think back on like, maybe I shouldn't have gone by myself, but I was so eager to sort of participate and to witness and connect that I kind of let that take priority over the safety. So I think it's always important for us to check in on the safety versus curiosity component. I think curiosity is another trait and characteristic that's important when you're thinking about building friendships and community, is being curious about, what is it that they're going to, how is it that, curious about the smallest details. I think showing that you're there beyond your own interests, but also to learn, I think is really important.
Yeah. So Marie asked, do you think any of that disconnect is due to the language barrier? That's a great question.
What do you think, Renee?
Yeah, yeah, because I think that's what I was saying, right? So I think so. I think that could be a part of it as well. Because again, just like Kiratiana said, you can't generalize all Brazilians. So you can't say, but I think that part of it may be, I was having a conversation with some Brazilian friends, and one of them was like, yeah, we get tired of having to try to explain and understand and not being able to understand what you're saying. Like in general, we were talking about with foreigners. And so she was saying that, and I just kind of laughed. And she was like, yeah, sometimes I just give up and don't want to, feel like trying. So that could, possibly be a fact. That could be that's probably a good factor as well. So sometimes feeling as if, okay, we can't really communicate and get our points across, then I'm not gonna keep trying to hang out with that American who can barely talk.
Yeah. Yes, and I think that's interesting.
But I still kind of see that now, even though I speak fluent Portuguese. So I think it's a part, but I don't think it's 100%. Go ahead, Nefertiti.
Oh, sorry, I interrupted. I thought you would, because you froze, and I was like, is she done? Oh, she froze. Sorry. I was just going to say another kind of thing that was helpful for me was kind of having someone that could kind of bridge a little bit between the language barrier. So sometimes we meet people who were really, Brazilians who were really into English, or they're excited about meeting someone to practice their English with. And sometimes that person is also helpful in helping you with the Portuguese, and they're willing to kind of be that sort of mediator. So I think if you're going somewhere wherever your language skills are not like up here, to really kind of pay attention to those folks in the community that you can kind of like, oh, can you help me understand this? Because for me in Salvador, for example, like folks speak 40% Portuguese and 60% Bayanese, which is like, all of the cultural contextual references of phrases, of words is huge. It's vast and very rich. And there's things that just go over my head. And, so it's like, who can explain what this is? And then once you kind of understand it and you start to sort of develop an ability to use those phrases in the right moment, then people kind of, she kind of gets it. So they also open up in a different way. So I think for sure, like how we sort of make that effort to deepen our language abilities is super key. At least for me, it's been.
Yes. All right. So if anybody that's coming on, say hello. If anybody else has any questions, Let us know. Let us know. So I do want to talk about also like one of the big things, like big ways to meet people when you're traveling is, or trying to find community and living in another country, is joining groups, whether it's on Facebook, usually starting from social media. Like there's tons of travel groups. There's Nomadness Travel Tribe. There's Nomad for Life community. Sisters Who Travel and Date. I mean, there's tons. And for me, that's been a big way that I've met a lot of people. I met tons of people just because on the group they're like, "Oh, I'm going to Brazil. Anyone there?" And I'm like, "Hey, I'm here." And then we meet up. So I think that that's an important way if you want to try to be able to make friends. If you're going there on your own, and you don't know anyone, and you want to take that chance, So use the resources. There's tons of resources out there. So Mr. Staljam is responding to what you said now. That Bayanese had me jacked up perpetually. It can be frustrating to the point that I would self-isolate at times.
Yes, that happens.
That's interesting.
And it even happens in the context of being with people. Like the conversation goes somewhere and you're so, like, we do have to work extra hard to understand and be present, because we're trying to understand everything. And I think that's why I kind of like doing that thing of who of the people that I'm hanging out with kind of has a little bit more of that disposition to kind of, the person I can be like, what are they talking about? Can you explain it to me? Because it has been super helpful for me. I'm really lucky right now to have a companion. So my girlfriend, she is great. And some moments she's like, oh, I have to explain this again. But, she's been helpful in those moments. And before her, it was different friends. It was different people who are from Bahia who are interested and think it's funny and cute that, like, I don't get everything, that I mix up my words, that I, you start to sort of take on this identity as someone who's trying. And so there's at least in my case, folks have been like, okay with having to do that. But yeah, I hear that self-isolation. I think it's okay to kind of like turn your head off, because it is an extra effort every day to go out and try and connect, right?
So Mrs. Staljam, I think, is responding to this. He said, I studied at Middlebury Language School and I had the grammar and a decent vocabulary, but in Salvador, it's like I was almost starting over as a Portuguese novice. It's so true. It's so true. And Marie says, me too, Mr. Staljam. Middlebury really helped me. Awesome. Maybe I need to go to Middlebury. But, and it's like you said, like the Bayanese, there's a whole different language. And I remember when I lived in Salvador, people were like, this is the worst place to learn Portuguese.
Oh, God.
Because there's so much slang, there's so much. And, I became fluent in Salvador. And then I do have to say, by the time I went to like Sao Paulo, people would be talking. And then when I lived in Minas Gerais for a while, then Rio, I'm like, they were saying like different things I had never heard of. And I'm like, what is this? What does that mean? Oh, I was like, okay, am I really fluent in Portuguese?
Yeah. Yes.
So true. So true. Where is Middlebury?
I don't know. It's in Salvador, the school? I haven't heard.
No, it's in I thought it was in Connecticut somewhere. It's in the US.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Middle Staljam is from New York. So maybe in New York? Marie, are you from New York too? I don't know. Maybe it might be in New York. Yeah. So, but that's the thing also. I think that's the thing.
But yes, I
if
think
you study, can you hear me? I think it's going out. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Oh, okay. No, I was just saying, I was just going to say, I think that's the thing that you can study a language in school, but then when you go to the different country, it's like, no, it's almost like you never really studied that language. You don't really get it like really until you're living, you're immersed in it. You know, the same thing. Like I studied Spanish almost all my life. And then I went to Argentina to become fluent. When I got to Argentina, I couldn't understand anything, you know? It was like, what? But it did help me to pick up Portuguese a little bit quicker. So, oh man, it looks like a lot of people went to Middlebury because there's a Jumatatu.
Okay.
Yeah, that says it's in Vermont. And so they missed the Style Jam. So I'm assuming Jumatatu also went to
oh, hey, Juma.
Middlebury.
Yeah.
And then Marie says, really? Go ahead.
I mean, I think I'm gonna interject here, and I think it's important for me to be careful about when we talk about where is it best to learn a particular language, because I think we start to get into the territory of, you know, I think language, and especially being a colonial language, Portuguese or English or Spanish, starts to get into a tricky place about, well, what is correct or good Portuguese and what isn't. And I think when I brought up Bayanese, for me, it was actually more about recognizing how rich and powerful language has been transformed by a predominantly, you know, Afro-Brazilian and indigenous community, such that so much of the Bayanese we talk about references cultural references that are Afro-Brazilian, particular contexts that are indigenous, particular contexts that are about the sertão, which is, you know, the interior dry region. And sort of for me, I've learned a lot about the history of different struggles and different moments and, you know, popular medicines, popular foods through these sort of more popular referencing of languages. And I think for me, it's important to kind of bring that up because folks who live in Bahia or the Northeast regions, there is definitely in Brazil, like regional prejudice. So folks from the Northeast and folks from the Southeast. So the Southeast is like São Paulo, Rio, you know, the South regions of Santa Catarina. So there's this idea that those regions are kind of, you know, they're more ahead, they're smarter, they're more cosmopolitan. And, you know, the Northeast is sort of backwards in quotes. And the Northeast is also the Blackest region. It is the poorest region. And so really thinking about how we think about language and too, how that connects, I think is important to think about, you know, whose languages are we speaking and which folks are we trying to connect to? For me, it's been really eye-opening and important to hear. So.
And that's a good point. That's a good point. Because it's interesting. Like, I was saying it was Brazil. It was the Baianos who said that to me. Like, this is the wrong place to learn Portuguese. So it's them themselves saying that, you know. But it's interesting because as you say that, like, you know, when we look at this whole, even just colonization and just as Black people in general, wherever you are, whether the U.S. or wherever, I think it becomes so ingrained in us a lot of times, just the whole inferiority thing. And so I think that, you know, so I'm really happy to hear you say that a lot of times, you know, we look at ourselves, and in this case, in the Baiana language, and people will, you know, they'll say, oh, this is the worst place to learn the language. And then not even realizing where that's coming from. Where have they been hearing that so many times? So that's a really good point. Thank you. Thank you.
For sure.
Yeah. And then Mr. Style Jam talks about the Bayanese thing. The concept of Bayanese reminds me of Ebonics in the USA. New York cats talk different from down south cats and different from West Coast dudes. I get lost listening to Bay Area peeps sometimes. And Nefertiti's from the Bay.
He's hella tripping.
Yeah. But that's an interesting point too, because like I grew up in New York, and then when I moved to Florida, I couldn't understand what people in Florida were saying. They're like, I'm finna go get this. I'm like, finna? What does finna mean? And like, I was like, what? Yeah, so.
Yes. So language is huge wherever you're trying to go. And I think when, kind of adding to those points we made about, connecting, building trust through joining an organization or a group, offering service, I think another is to join groups where you have an interest or a hobby or some kind of practice that you enjoy, because it's in those like off moments after, a meeting or rehearsal, when you're hanging out, that the trust is built, that you're learning the language in these different ways. So for me, it was really important to, I'm in a couple different percussion groups, and that space has been really big in terms of building trust with other queer women in Salvador, which for me initially the first few years was really difficult to find. I had come at a time when Salvador, at least for folks who were not from there, the presence of the queer community was was less visible. And so it was hard for me to figure out, where do I kind of find those spaces? And so, the last few years I've been able to kind of find those spaces, and then to find it through music has been like an added bonus for me. So I think I'm always like, how is it that I think the virtual space is like, how can queer folks specifically kind of find, those connections and spaces? Because when I had arrived in Salvador at the time, there was some worry for me about safety and about knowing how or where I could be out or not. So I think that's another thing to think about too, is, I didn't do that kind of recon before I decided to go to Salvador. Like, is this a safe space, safe city for queer folks? I was so focused on the school that when I got there, I was like, oh, I didn't think about this part, and it is important. So.
Cool.
Sorry, I kind of rambled.
So you had mentioned earlier about like way in the beginning, we were talking about the story about Amara and going to my space, that I had. And that was one of the things that, me and you started, and I'd love to share about that. Like people coming to move to Brazil or to another country, I think that you can have an opportunity to share and do something. Like a lot of times people want to be able to give back to that community, or they want to do something, And so for me, I was with a great guy named Seth, and we had our little clinic. And so literally, we were both there working. I was doing Reiki, teaching Reiki. Yeah, I brought a lot of people there. He was doing acupuncture. And it was just something that really just kind of blew up. And it was for the community, Mujeres Sereia, for one of the communities for people to come to. But then, it started opening up, and different foreigners would come. But it was just a beautiful space. People who needed healing, people who just would have never did acupuncture, would have never did Reiki. It was amazing. I taught kids from that community how to do Reiki. And those kids would come in and they would sit down and they would do the Reiki, like 13-year-old kids, 12-year-old kids. Yes. And then, we would teach them how to do the acupuncture, the ear acupuncture. And it was just an amazing space. And to be able to feel like you're giving back in a certain way, I think is so important. And I think that this is part of why, Nefertiti and I are doing the free meditations on Saturdays, because that's also another way to give back to this expanded community, and not just people here in Brazil, but people worldwide who might need support, who's stressed, who needs another avenue to be able to relax. And so we, during the midst of this pandemic, we decided, let's do this free meditation. And that's what our space was like. It was donation based, but even if you didn't have any money, didn't have to donate. Sometimes people would bring incense. Sometimes people would bring banana or apples or something, and it was all welcome, and then sometimes, on a Sunday we would cook and we'd have this big old meal. And after people were meditating and receiving Reiki, we'd come together and eat. It was so beautiful. And I think that if you can go to another country and you have something to offer, being able to see how can you do that? How can you be of service? How can you give back to that community? And I think that sometimes you find some people come and they just want to take. Okay, let me get, I'm here because I have more privilege than when I do back at home or whatever, But for me personally, I think it's good if you have something to offer and you want to and you can. It's very rewarding. It's very rewarding. And sometimes, even if you don't feel like there's a service that you could start, volunteering, good ways to like give back, do and connect to people, and then you started Casa Rosada. So my place was Casinha Daisy States, which is Little House 16. 16 was the address.
Shout out.
And yours is Casa Rosada, Pink House.
Yeah, the Pink House. And Kiratiana, I'm curious because I think the thing around space is actually another thing in terms of building community. Like, what are the physical spaces available for that? And I don't know if in Rio, you made spaces for that. You talked about organizing meetup groups, but if in your work you kind of explored or touched on that as well.
I would say that most of the physical community that I was involved in involved me actually going to places that were not kind of part of this Zona Sul Rio de Janeiro community. For those of you guys who aren't familiar with Rio de Janeiro, most of you are probably seeing Copacabana. That's in Zona Sul. It's a very privileged area, very rich area. And that's where most expats and people of means live. But if you want to explore, just Afro Rio de Janeiro, or you want to even just like connect with Black Brazilians, you have to leave the space. So a lot of just like my social life and work life, particularly in the first 2 years, involved me really leaving Zona Sul, getting on the train. I couldn't afford to take Ubers. Uber didn't even exist the first year and a half I was in Rio.
Girl, by the time Uber came, I was like, yes. No more 2-hour long bus waits in the heat.
That was us, bus riders.
Yes.
And so I never actually created an entire physical space for a community like you guys did, but I definitely enjoyed just going to samba schools, which were not anywhere close to Zona Sul. And also I would say one of my favorite places to go to, like every time I would go to Rio de Janeiro, every time I go to Sao Paulo, oh gosh, what is the name? I'm almost forgetting the name because I haven't been in a while. There was a Black space in Sao Paulo that was like the first place I went to when I would go to Sao Paulo. I can't remember the space, but it used to be run by, at the time, she was a transgender woman who was running this space. Now she's actually a state deputy for the state of Sao Paulo.
Erica Hilton.
Erica Malanguinhos, but
she's fantastic.
Like I enjoyed it when Black Brazilians created spaces, and I sure did go to them. So I didn't create spaces, but I went to their spaces.
And that's important. I think that's important as well, because I think giving visibility to those spaces in our networks also kind of in a way guarantees their safety, right? Because Black spaces are constantly also always being threatened, shut down. That's true. Criminalized. So I think
Aparelia Luzia. Yes. Juma Tatu. Aparelia Luzia.
Yay, Juma. Yes, because I think, as I was saying, it's important for our presence and to share that in our networks, because it gives them a visibility and protection. And sort of speaking about spaces in Salvador, I don't know if you all know this, but Ileaye is closing, in the process of closing.
I've been trying to figure out what is going on there. It is the most strange story.
Yeah,
it's the most strangest case. I mean, this is weird. I don't know who to believe.
So it's an
what's going on
story of how it all went down.
Do you know what the story? Can you tell us? Can you explain to us what's going on? So, for people who aren't familiar, maybe it seems like most of you guys on here know Salvador. Ileaye is actually the first Afro-Bloco in all of Brazil. Started in like the early 70s as a carnival organization that really protagonize Blackness in Africa. And it's actually been traditionally a carnival organization, actually traditionally for what we would call darker skinned Black people in Brazil, because there traditionally, historically has been different treatment regarding Black people in regards to their skin color. And so people who were of a darker skin tone actually, and who had a very strong connection to Candomblé, created this carnival social group in the almost 40 years ago, or 50 years, almost 40 years ago, I think.
Yeah, 1973.
Yeah, and it's been like the music they produce, all the music is percussion based. The dancing has actually been one of the very, up until probably the last 5 years, one of the very few ways that Black people could really evolve their self-esteem, particularly in Salvador, just because Brazil is a weird place, you know, lots of Black people, but the way that the racism is, it affects Black people in Brazil, it really does affect self-esteem. And so please, Nefertiti, explain to us what is going on, because I need to get to the bottom of this.
Y'all, I don't know.
I paraded 3 times with LAA, which is really strange because I actually probably would not do it again. But I was like almost 20 years ago, I was like this light-skinned Black American person who thought I was the Blackest person parading with LAA. I was like, okay.
Yeah, so it's beautiful to go out with them when they start, right? And when they would leave from the Senzala and they would do a song. They would have the Mãe Santo, who takes care of the house, you know, say a prayer, release the doves.
The Liberdade, that was so beautiful to go to the opening ceremony.
So it's for sure a very spiritual cortejo, and it's fun and powerful. And what Ileade did was open the door for so many other cortejos afros to occupy space during Carnival as well. And I think even despite that history, you know, I think the last few years, I don't know if I can condense the story because, you know, we've gone a little bit over time, but basically there's been some conflict between the leadership of the Senzala of Ileaye and the folks who work there. And that's kind of what has brought the house down, because there was a person who had brought kind of like a civil suit against the house because of some work issues in terms of how they were treated and discrimination. And they actually the judge voted in favor of this defendant. So to pay back the defendant, Ileaye had to pay, I think it was like 400,000 reais, a very exorbitant amount, which basically in many ways kind of bankrupt the organization. And so there was a movement to try and save Ileaye, raise funds, but there was basically sort of 2 camps that was born out of this, like who sides with the leadership, who's siding with this person. So it's in a moment of conflict and tension that's really intense. And who is going to sort of, hi, Will, he said, yes, he already answered. So I'm, again, like a distant, you know, supporter and admirer of the institution, but this is what I understand it's at right now, and sort of determining how they're going to mediate that. And then with the pandemic arriving,
their ability to earn money just evaporated.
So even during Carnival this year, they didn't qualify for the funding they get every year, and that was a very political move.
And why you say they didn't qualify? Okay.
No, so people were outraged. They were like, how did Ileaye not get funding? But that was sort of tied to this lawsuit issue. It's all kind of messy. So then the people, you know, spoke out, said, no, Ileaye has to go out. And then the city government gave like a special grant for Ileaye to be able to, you know, parade during Carnival this year, which they do every year. So it's already, you know, was kind of already in this non-sustainable place financially. And then with the pandemic, it's kind of made it even more complicated. And so that's kind of where it's at right now. And I think, that's what I can share. I don't know if that clarifies a little bit.
Not really. Nobody, not really. I mean, it clarifies it. I mean, I feel like Ilya probably technically they did something very wrong with not paying somebody. That's what it pretty much seems like it boils down to. And I mean, I'm obviously this is not really related to our conversation, but it just sounds like they haven't modernized the way that they pay people, the way that they treat people in terms of their, in terms of an organization being so huge. Like you can't treat people like it's like a family. It's an organization where you got to treat people fairly or pay people fairly too.
Yeah, and this isn't the first time this kind of issue has come up. And I think these kinds of breaks really give space for renovation. Like you're saying, like it is time to update and really rethink how it is that we structure these spaces that are for Black folks. Like, how is it that we're treating each other? Are we just perpetuating relationships of hierarchy that don't really serve us anymore? And are we really making the effort to kind of let that go? And I think because of that question, I personally in Salvador didn't end up, frequenting and being a part of certain groups and spaces because I was seeing this being perpetuated. And I was like, I can't engage in that anymore, no matter how bad I want to dance with them or, play with them because of what they've meant for the world. It's like in the day-to-day, if that's still kind of the practice, like, I can't be part of that. So it's been hard to balance that because it's meant closing the doors to certain communities for me. Yeah. So, yeah.
So Marie goes to a question, like the topic of community. And here she asked about how do you balance, because she's talking about the privilege. And she says, that's a good point about privilege from earlier on. And how do you balance that? Is volunteering the answer? So, and that's a really good question, Marie. I'm not sure if you're still on. Hopefully you are still on because you asked that a while ago. But that's a great question because, there are some people who come and honestly, in my opinion, people might feel differently. I think as a foreigner, we do have privilege here and you see it, and it's unfortunate because I've seen it as a foreigner in so many different situations, and it just feels really bad. Like it feels really bad to see locals not being able to be a part of something or do something, or an example, because I'm an American and I'll go to the hospital or the clinic. They see my foreign passport or hear, my language, and they'll come and they'll give me great service, and that's one of the things. I've had excellent service here in the free healthcare system.
But really?
A lot of, oh my God, I've had some great services. I have a friend too who came just to Brazil to have surgery through the free healthcare system. Well, he was living here for some time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because we get really good. Yeah, we get really good service a lot of times just because as a foreigner, the doctor wants to make sure you're getting good treatment and that, you can say something good about their system. Okay, great. Marie says she's still here. Awesome. Thank you. And so, I don't know how to balance that. And I don't know if volunteering is the solution, is the answer. But for me personally, that was one of the things that helped me feel good. I think that also being able to speak up and having our voice when we see that someone is not being treated fairly or something, being able to speak up, maybe even if they can't. And I don't know if one of you have a solution or what you think would be a good solution to that or balance to that. So yeah, my volunteering wasn't necessarily for that one particular reason, but it definitely did help. And it helped me to feel like I'm able to give back and I'm doing something. So Marie actually asked a question for you, Kiratiana. Have you had issues with the healthcare system? But I'm sorry. If you guys have anything to share about that, about the privilege before, and I think she asked that because of your response.
So a majority of the time that I was been in Brazil, I've actually had private insurance, and I would pay probably up to about $200 a month for private insurance, just because I just felt more comfortable having the extra padded barrier. I do know friends who have not had great experiences with the public insurance. So, and also I think it also depends on where you are in Brazil as well, because Rio is right now is suffering from a healthcare system that has been defunded in the last 5 to 10 years. But you know, it may be totally different in another state where that is not the case. So I think it just depends on your financial ability and how much trust you have in relying on the free healthcare system. I felt I was able to afford it, so I actually did just buy the extra insurance, private insurance they call it.
And that's a good point, because I've noticed a difference between living in Salvador and being here in Rio. Like I felt like I've never gone through the private healthcare system in Salvador, and it was great. Like, but here in Rio, I've seen and met like a lot of difficulty, and it's pushed me to just go to private and pay out of pocket. Like I'm like, and I think it's also bigger here. It's a bigger city, and I feel like it's just harder to get to a place, even though you have the postals all over. But I felt like the system was a little bit more complicated. So I just, you know, and it wasn't so expensive to pay out of pocket. So everything that I've needed here in Rio, I've just paid out of pocket, you know. So, and I don't know what it was like for you, Nefertiti.
Well, I've had public the whole time there, kind of similar to you, Renée, but I'll pay out of pocket when I want to go somewhere that's faster. For me, the difference has to do with time. So if you want to access the public system to see a specialist, it takes a really long time to go through the system to finally see a specialist. And for me, it kind of became clear as I spent more time living in Brazil, you either pay for things with money or time. So it was always like, okay, am I going to pay for with money, or do I have money right now, or do I have time? So depending on where I was at in my life, you know, I would do either one. But yeah.
So we have 2 questions here, Marie and Alex. So Marie says, sort of related to my other question, how do you all think the pandemic will affect our ability to build community in Brazil and the willingness of Brazilians to accept us?
So I that's very okay. I'm gonna be a little bit I don't want to. I welcome the question, but I actually think the question is slightly self-centered. And I only say it's self-centered because if you've been following Brazil and the news in Brazil, Brazilians are just getting, like, I think Americans too. America is going through the same thing, but Brazilians, especially Black Brazilians, especially Indigenous Brazilians, are getting just beat up. I don't know if that's the right word. That's not the right word. But when I say beat up, I mean like so much is happening in regards to people dying from coronavirus, people dying from police violence, people's rights people not having the ability to make money. I'm not sure if I would necessarily focus on Brazilians being willing to accept you all, because I do think that in general, Brazilians are very warm and welcoming people. But I just think that, I don't know. I think Brazil is going through a change, a very drastic change, just like America is going through a drastic change right now. And I think it's going to change Brazilians in general. I'm not sure if Brazilians are going to be the same people, but I just wouldn't worry about how that right now. I wouldn't worry about how that change is going to affect me, just because I'm worried about how Brazilians are going to just like survive the next 2 years. And the reason, I hate to be like this. It's not that I don't worry about the U.S. I do think in general, the U.S. we have stronger institutions. We don't necessarily have a social net that's very strong, but it's even weaker in Brazil. The institutions are weaker and the social net is even weaker in Brazil. And I just feel like, man, how are my people going to survive for the next 2 years? That's what I'm just worried about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I've been in Brazil. I just came to the Bay Area like a month ago. So while I was there for the first part of the pandemic, I think that for me there was a piece of like checking in with the people who I have relationships already with online and via phone, and then making the added effort to kind of show up for my neighbors. So before the pandemic, I'm like always running around the city and other spaces, spent little time in my neighborhood. And now I was like locked down in my neighborhood 24 hours a day. And, you know, some of them have kids, some of them are over 65. So I was like, well, you know, you know, if I want to continue to have a sense of community and not feel so isolated, which I did many days, you know, I have to do the work and I have to use that privilege that I have, whether it's being able to walk because, you know, my elder neighbors can't go up and down the stairs to get water or groceries. So I just kind of like made myself available in that way. And a lot of them had never seen me or, you know, didn't even know I lived down the street, but kind of like just doing that extra, like, if you need anything, I'm here. You know, if you need to translate anything, I speak English. If you need to get groceries, you know, I'm here. And, you know, like maybe a couple times, a couple folks kind of reached out, but, you know, other than that, there wasn't much engaging that I did, but it was kind of like just being like, yo, I'm here. And I think that the resentment might come from a lack of effort on our part. So I think you're always kind of needing to show that effort, that you're willing to kind of take that extra step.
And I agree with that. And that's similar to me here in my community. I started to make masks and, you know, I really rounded up to get donations from different people, foreigners specifically, not Brazilians. So I got a lot of donations from foreigners in the US, and I made the mask and I went and I handed out to people. And actually I've met a lot of people. I've met Haitians in my community. I was like, whoa, I didn't know there were so many Haitians living here.
Really?
You know, so it was kind of cool. I had never really walked all the way up my hill. You know how I don't like walking up them hills unless I have to. I walked enough, but you know, it was kind of cool because I really got to meet a lot of people that I hadn't met, and it was just really, really, really nice. And I feel like that takes away any resentment that they might feel, that they see you really there for them and helping. And, you know, I went through and I was meeting seamstresses from the community who I had never met, so that they can make the mask and they can get some, you know, some extra money. So it was about, okay, who in the community can make the mask so that they can earn, you know, some extra money because they don't, you know, they don't have work right now with the pandemic. And then going through and handing out. And actually, I have a funny story, real quick. It's not a long story, but just so you can kind of see how it is here with the Brazilians. So I'm looking for the seamstress. I don't know her, never met her, and I'm asking people, "Oh, is there a seamstress here?" And they're like, "Yeah, there's a seamstress up there. Just keep walking up, and you know, right after the luncheonette, the little snack place, there's this house, and you go in." So I'm walking up. And I see the house. I see some people standing outside, you know, talking, drinking their beer, and they're like, and I'm like, "Is this seamstress Donna Olga? Is this her place?" They're like, "Yeah, yeah, just go in." And I'm like, "Just go in." I'm like, "I don't know this lady." So I'm like, "Okay," and I'm like going in, and I'm like, "Excuse me." She's like at the end of her house. So I'm like, "Excuse me, are you a seamstress?" She's like, "Yeah, come on in." And I'm like, okay. So I go in, and you know, and I don't have a mask at this time. She doesn't have a mask, and it's an older lady. This is like the very beginning. And she's like, "Why are you so far away? Come over here." And I'm like, "Well, you know, because you know, we got coronavirus going on, and I don't want to get too close
Don't try to
to
kiss
you."
me.
Right. Because you know, they gotta touch you. And I was like, not so much for me, but for you. You're an older lady, and I don't want to get you sick or anything. But you know, I want to make masks, and so it's just so funny. And that's just like very much like a typical when you go into like the community where Brazilians live, like they're open in that sense. You know, we're talking about warm. So this lady who didn't know me, she's like, "Come on in," and so I think that, you know, if you're not like I think that if they feel that you're trying to help, you're of good, then, you know, they're going to accept you, you know. And Brazilians are very big with feeling energy. And so even if you can't do anything, but they can feel that energy that you're not trying to exploit, you're not trying to take advantage, they're going to be welcoming, and they're going to accept you. So we have a couple more questions, actually. Alex also asked a question, and then Marie asked another question. Alex says, have Brazilians ever been resentful of you because of your perceived or real privilege being an American?
I think
it's a good question.
I've actually never experienced Brazilians being resentful of privilege, but I think it depends on maybe the type of Brazilians you surround yourself with. I have experienced the fact where Brazilians, like especially more Brazilians who are considered part of the Black social movement, they will call out what they call a colonialism of American thought that happens in Brazil. So that's probably the only time I felt where maybe my privilege, the privilege of American culture just kind of being like spreading around the world has been called out. But in general, personally, I haven't felt like Brazilians have been resentful per se.
Yeah, I haven't felt like Brazilians have been resentful either. Now, I do see a slight difference in if they're going to mug someone, they're going to mug a blonde-haired, blue-eyed person before a Black person. So I don't know
about that. I've been mugged 3 times, so.
Oh, you have?
Yes.
Okay. So there goes that theory. Then yeah, I haven't. I just remember I was walking and literally there was a white lady in front of me, and we weren't that far apart, and this man came up with straight to her and mugged her as opposed to me. But it could have been just like I didn't look like I had any money, because I never go out looking like I have money. Like I wear like I don't wear any jewelry, I don't wear anything. My backpack has holes in it, so they look at me, they look me up and down twice, and be like, okay, no, she ain't got nothing. Yeah, but yeah, I haven't noticed any resentment. I haven't felt any based on privilege or anything like that. Same that for you want to add anything or
I was like, I don't have to answer it, but I can.
Okay.
I mean, it's a complicated question because I think I think that race plays into it. I think that skin color plays into it. I think that gender plays into it. I think that there's kind of a lot of intersections that play into what we mean by resentful and who is being resentful. And language also, you know, is part of it too. And then like your personal own like insecurities. Like I feel like everybody has something against me just because I have like issues with my self-esteem. So I don't know if they actually feel that way or if it's really, you know, but I'm also really light skinned, and I definitely feel like that's, you know, that's an issue in some spaces, and that's rightfully so because colorism in Brazil and in Bahia especially is still very awful. So there's this aspect of that for sure. But I feel that more in like kind of general eye sense and not necessarily for the people that I've built relationships with.
Okay, so Mr. Style Jam, Renee and Kiratiana, who do you guys have for your insurance? I don't have insurance. I use a public health care system.
I think I have Sul America.
Okay. And Marie says, thanks, Kiratiana. I only have 200 characters for my questions, so I can't articulate myself like I normally would. I realized that the way I wrote, it was a self-centered though. Sorry,
I apologize.
I'm sorry, were you saying something, Kiratiana?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay, so, and then Marie says, thank you, ladies. So yes, we have gone over on our time, but way over.
Super.
you want to do a little summary of some things, some key points where people can go for community, to find community? A quick little summary for those who came on late.
Sure. Well, thanks everyone for staying on and asking these great questions and keeping us engaged with each other, with you, with our own stories. I think that's always exciting. I think kind of the main takeaways is like anywhere you go, beside if you're thinking about what your work and what you're doing there, the best way to build community with folks locally, I think, is showing up and being of service in some way, offering the skills that you have, building trust, and thinking about how you build those relationships. I think really making that effort with language, both officially and also all of the rich sort of local ways people speak, the context that they speak in, what they speak about. And I think what you both mentioned, really being proactive in getting folks together, via WhatsApp or Facebook, being really proactive and like, hey, let's get together. Hey, let's go do something. I think now that we're in pandemic time, it can be, hey, let's have a Zoom call with, whatever it is, but really doing that thing to organize folks together. I know
that's true, because I have not been organizing people together right now. I just in my own world.
Totally. Me too.
And you used to do that a lot. Yeah. And me too. Yeah.
So I think those are kind of the main things that we took away. I think also thinking about the physical spaces that we make open for community, whether it's creating those spaces like Renee and I did, or whether it's frequenting the spaces that are already there, that especially Black Brazilians are running, and really showing up, showing support, giving visibility. I think is also showing solidarity for those spaces as well. So yeah, I think that's kind of my summary.
I wanted to talk about my newsletter.
Please.
So I actually about a month ago launched a newsletter called, and hopefully I can write it down in the comments. So it's called Coisa de Preto, which basically means like it's black thing in Portuguese. And I launched this newsletter to kind of share more about Black Afro-Brazilian news, culture, things going on. Just because as a journalist, I've done amazing work on just all these issues and people, but I want to, and I'll let me write it out for you. It's Coisa. Hold on, let me try to get it on the screen. The reason is like there's not one outlet in America who's going to take an article about Afro-Brazil for me at 2 or 3 times a week. It's just not possible. So I just needed another outlet to just share what is going on in Brazil, in Black Brazil, in a way that creates a community with my readers. So that's why I started this newsletter. I just typed it in the comments on the side. And so I encourage you guys to go look at that newsletter and sign up. And if it is, part of it is paid. So if you pay for it, you actually get every single newsletter, 3 newsletters per week. And if you don't pay for it, you're still welcome into the community. You don't get as much, but you're still welcomed into the community.
Awesome. So that's a great resource. And also, so thank you everyone for coming on. Check out our Patreon, Patreon at Red Lipstick Talk. We have, it's a way of supporting us so that we can continue to bring you this information, as well as the free Saturday meditations that we lead. That's all part of the Red Lipstick Talk. So we have membership starting at just $3. And it's just a way of showing your support. Depending on a different level, we give you shout outs and kisses with the red lips on our YouTube show as a way of saying thank you for your support. You will also get the inside scoop of what shows will be coming up before we launch, before we air the shows, as well as the inside. As well as the behind the scenes with us. Our meetings, our weekly meetings, how crazy they are, and how we're going to talk about all kinds of, other stuff before we get to our meeting. I don't know, but it's just fun. So check that out as well, Red Lipstick Talk. And yeah, this has been great. Thank
Definitely
you, everyone.
on YouTube. Yes, if there's
Yes,
folks who are here for the first time, check out our other episodes. Subscribe to our channel. We're here. Yes. We're here.
So thank you all for the comments that you made. Thank you for being part of this. Yes, subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit like. If you like this, hit like. Also, you know, if you got a lot out of this, you enjoyed it, you feel like it was informative, like a lot of people said, excellent conversation, please share this. Share this to other people, with other people that you think might enjoy it. Share it with other people who may be wanting to move abroad or just travel, because it'll be great to give them some ideas of what they can do. So, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you can receive the messages for our upcoming videos. Yay. All right. Well, good night. Thank you guys for staying on an hour and a half. Oh my God. And Kiratiana, you made it this whole time.
No, tired.
So I say that real quick because Kiratiana, I don't know how she do it. She can hang. We'll go out. She'll be partying like 5 days in a row. The 6th day I join in. You know, she'll be hanging, but she'll be like falling asleep. But she'll be there. She'll be there.
Thank you so much, Kiratiana, for sharing your
insights. Thank you for being here. It was awesome. Thank you guys. Love you all.
I love
Bye.
You. Be safe, y'all. Wear your mask if you go out.
Yes. And keep that social distancing, physical distancing. Be social.